Tucked up high in the Himalayas lies the small village of Lukla, Nepal. The village is considered by many Everest hopefuls to be the first stop on the way to Everest Base Camp. Sitting at 9,830 feet or 2,860 meters above sea level, it has gained popularity with mountaineers primarily due to the small airport located within the village, the Tenzig-Hillary Airport, or the Lukla Airport for short. Constructed in 1964, the construction of the airstrip was overseen by Sir Edmund Hillary himself. Hillary had originally planned to build the airport in the flat farmland surrounding the village, but after the farmers declined to sell him their land, he bought some precariously sloped land on the eastern side of the village, which became the site at which the airport stands today. Although it is a very small airport, the Tenzig-Hillary Airport services many passengers every year, with a peak of over 146,000 passengers in 2017. The airport is also where Lukla and the small surrounding villages receive their supplies and cargo from the outside world from, as there are no roads into the region. The Tenzig-Hillary Airport is often referred to as the world's most dangerous airport. The runway at the airport is extremely short, being only 1,729 feet or 527 meters long, and it is angled at a treacherous 11.7% slope, with a sheer drop-off into the valley below at the end of it. The airport hasn't earned its dubious reputation solely due to the runway, however, as the location of the airport itself presents a great hazard to pilots and their aircrafts. Lukla is located in the Himalayas and tucked into a bowl of mountains. Due to this, there are lots of strong crosswinds, particularly in the afternoons, which is why most flights are scheduled for the morning, and due to the notoriously foul Himalayan weather, even then, over 50% of flights into the airport are cancelled due to the rapidly changing weather conditions. When the weather is good at the airport, it is very busy, servicing over 80 incoming and outgoing planes in a day, all on one single runway. And due to the surrounding mountainous terrains, there is no go-around procedure for aborting a landing, so incoming pilots only get one chance to approach into the little airstrip for landing correctly. There are no landing instruments at the airport, meaning that it is a strictly visual approach. Because of how dangerous it is to fly in and out of this airport, the Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal requires that all pilots have over 100 short takeoff and landing plane flights, over a year's experience flying short takeoff and landing planes, and over 10 flights with an instructor pilot specifically for learning how to land and take off at the Lukla Airport. The small airlines that service this airport from Kathmandu are all flown by highly experienced and specialized pilots that know the airport, flight path, and surrounding area quite well. One of these airlines that serviced the airport in 2008 was known as Yeti Airlines. On the early morning of October 8, 2008 at the Kathmandu Airport in Nepal, 16 passengers and 3 crew members loaded aboard a DHC-6 Twin Otter Series 300, registered 9NAFE for Yeti Airlines Flight 103. They were about to embark on a brief, approximately 35-minute flight from Kathmandu to Lukla. 12 of the passengers that morning were German tourists, with 2 Australians and 2 Nepalese rounding out their ranks. The captain of the flight that morning, who was not named in the official accident report, had 8,185 total flight hours, with 7,180 of them flying the DHC-6 300. The captain was well liked and joined the company in 2006. He was, quote, friendly, quiet, non-macho, and rated high by his contemporaries with no history of accident or incidents. The first officer on board, who is also not named in the official report, had 556 flight hours, with 341 hours flying the DHC-6 300. The first officer was described as a sincere and reserved type, and while he lacked in relative experience to the captain, he was well qualified to fly the route. Yeti Airlines Flight 103 was one of several other tightly scheduled Yeti Airlines flights, and the third to depart that morning from Kathmandu. Yeti Airlines Flight 103 departed from the airport at Kathmandu at 6:51 a.m. local time and ascended to their cruising altitude of 11,500 feet. At 7:25 a.m., they lowered their altitude to 7,500 feet as per the flight plan and were to ascend eventually to 8,500 feet by the time they reached the Lukla Valley. At around that time, another flight was departing from the Lukla airport. This outgoing plane had a brief radio exchange with the Yeti Airlines flight that was due to land 5 minutes before Flight 103 and said that cloud cover was at 9,000 feet, but only on the long final approach and not the short final approach. At 7:43 a.m., Yeti Flight 103 entered the Lukla Valley at 8,500 feet as per the flight plan. At 7:45 a.m., Yeti Flight 103 contacted Lukla information about the reported cloud cover. Lukla reported back, "Affirm, sir, affirm." Yeti Flight 103 again contacted Lukla information a few seconds later to ask about the cloud cover and if the runway was visible, and Lukla information replied, "Affirm, sir, affirm, visible." Flight 103 then entered into a thick, rising, foggy cloud cover as they began their final approach into Lukla. The captain then confirmed with the first officer that they were on track for landing on the runway, and the first officer confirmed. However, as they continued their approach, the runway was still not visible, and at that point, the first officer, quote, raised his doubt in a soft voice about whether they could see the final approach or not. At 7:46 a.m., the plane struck a rock 50 meters short of the runway at an altitude 45 feet below the runway's threshold altitude. Upon striking the boulder, the plane shattered and was quickly ripped apart and scattered about the uneven terrain. Many various large parts of the wreckage were scattered up to 60 meters away from the point of impact, and the main fuselage wreckage and its wings quickly caught fire. At 7:57 a.m., Lukla reported to Kathmandu that Yeti Airlines Flight 103 had crashed and emergency services and protocols were activated. All 16 passengers were killed, as were the first officer and cabin attendant, but miraculously the captain survived the crash and was taken to the hospital with severe injuries, but still conscious. An investigation into the crash was launched in the aftermath of the incident, with experts from both Germany and Australia involved in the investigation. The team of experts looked into the safety records of Yeti Airlines and found that on their annual safety audit conducted on March 8th earlier that year by the Aviation Safety Department, that most of the status categories had been left blank. Due to the irregular requirements of flying in the region and inadequate manpower cited by the airlines, many of the Aviation Safety Department inspectors worked as pilots for some of these small local airlines, so it is thought that this is how such a blatant error remained overlooked. Yeti did not have a great record with DHC-6s, as they had 9 other incidents since 2001 involving the planes. As for the plane itself, its records were combed over, and although it did have a history of repairs and minor incidents, the committee determined that nothing was mechanically defective about the plane that would have been a factor in its airworthiness. They also quickly ruled out any foul play, as there was nothing to indicate anything of the sort. After interviewing the captain, they also determined that there was no weight issue with the plane or issues with steering. After poring over all the evidence they'd gathered, the investigators ruled the crash an accident, with pilot error listed as the cause. They noted the inherent dangers of the Lukla airport, such as the potentially rapid changing weather conditions, steep runway, need for visual approach, and the tight schedule of the airport as potential contributing factors in the crash. It was discovered that it was common practice within Yeti Airlines to proceed to Lukla even in potentially poor weather conditions, likely due to pressure from the company. The investigation found that there was no proper operating procedure at the Lukla Tower, and that Lukla had failed to inform Yeti 103 that they were simply affirming what they had heard the outgoing flight relay over the radio, and there was doubt as to whether this was the actual cloud cover or not between the pilots and the tower. They also found that the Lukla airport's firefighting capabilities were severely lacking and criticized the Lukla airport for mobilizing their emergency services so slowly in response to the crash. The commission found faults with the way the GPS had been set in the plane, but they could not conclusively rule it as a factor in the crash. The worker at the Lukla Tower was also found to have been in poor, high-stress working conditions, which influenced his ability to relay updated, accurate information to the incoming and outgoing planes. Their final conclusion was that the pilot error had been due in part to Yeti Airlines with their faulty safety record and company practices that didn't put safety first, a poor crew resource management practice where the first officer did not feel comfortable challenging the captain, and the captain's overconfidence was bolstered by the preceding Yeti Airlines flights that were just minutes ahead of him. Due to the rapid rising foggy cloud cover, the runway was not visible, and the cabin crew did not realize or doubt their error until far too late. I'll put a link to the full 48-page accident report in the description if you're curious and want to read more about it. In wake of the crash, safety conditions at Lukla Airport were improved and more stringent rules were put in place surrounding activity at the airport in poor weather conditions. The staff at Lukla were given standardized training and more staff were hired to reduce stress and poor working conditions. The fire and accident safety response protocol was updated at the airport, and the protruding boulder that the plane collided with was removed. The captain, who was the sole survivor of the collision, reportedly suffered with severe trauma and survivor's guilt stemming from the crash, and despite making a full physical recovery, unfortunately his mental health deteriorated severely and he was eventually committed to a psychiatric hospital. Yeti Airlines still exists today and services the area, and after the crash, Yeti vowed to improve its crew training and working conditions. In 2013, the EU banned all Nepalese aircraft from leaving Nepalese airspace, including Yeti Airlines, and despite this, it has grown to become the largest domestic flight carrier in Nepal. A plaque in memory of those who died that day has been erected near the site of the crash and engraved with the names of all of those who lost their life that tragic day on Yeti Airlines Flight 103. Every 8th of October, people gather at this memorial and celebrate the lives of those that died that day. Thank you all for watching.